thank you for coming on, Hendrik. And we've had a couple
Thank you
of
very much. Yeah.
issues getting you on, but we finally got you here. And yeah, I'm very excited for this podcast. It's been a while in the running, and yeah, thanks for coming on.
Yeah. Thanks for having me.
Maybe just to start off, would you like to talk to your background as a designer, just talking about your previous work experience and what's brought you to where you are today?
Yeah. Well, it hasn't always been obvious for me that I should be a a car designer. Well, the most guys in this industry then that they have been doing nothing but sketching cars since they've
Mm.
been 2 years old. In my case, when I was a little kid, then I was obsessed with working heavy like heavy equipment machineries, diggers, etc.
Mm.
And I remember I had to get up like very early to see the garbage truck come pick up the garbage, and then that obsession for those things gradually as I grew up developed into being interested in sci-fi, spaceships, robots. Growing up like very close to Lego as well
Yeah.
in Denmark. Then that was a huge part of my creativity came from just messing around with Lego, building what was supposed to be built from the package, and then straight after just disassembling and then
Yeah.
do my own things with my friends because it was so common and our Lego was just all over the place.
Mm.
Um, and then I think when I was 14 or 15, then there was this new guy coming into my class um, in school who was so much into cars, and we
Mm.
very quickly became good friends. And then I started to sketch cars more instead of all of the robots and other weird kind of things. And then it gradually developed into being a deeper interest into that. Then I studied industrial design in Denmark and went to Coventry University on my fourth semester as an Erasmus exchange student,
Yep.
and then ended up staying in
Mm.
on that course. And I've been in the UK since that,
Mm.
and now working at a consultancy called Voiceloso in Coventry, where we do a lot of prototyping, working demonstrator to like Geneva grade show cars
Mm.
for different OEMs and startups,
That's awesome.
as well as a lot of design work there.
Mm. Well, you're in the perfect place, Coventry. What's that? The home of
Yeah.
McLaren, right? Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah, that's a lot of the British automotive industry that has come out of Coventry.
Mm. Yeah, that's awesome. What do you
Yeah.
find most interesting about your current position?
I think the most interesting part of my current position is that I work at a place where they're so eager to push technologies,
Mm.
etc. So in between projects where it's a bit more quiet, then I get the opportunity to explore how I can utilize new technologies
Mm.
so that we can do the next projects better, faster, etc. Where we then lately have been exploring how we can utilize artificial intelligence to
Mm.
either design better, faster, or maybe completely different
Mm.
to
Yeah, we were,
effectively.
we were talking about that the other day, how you were integrating it
Yeah,
into the workflow. Would you like to talk a little bit more about that?
yeah. So lately, I have been using Midjourney a lot to try to create environments for my visualization processes,
Mm.
and also to do like very quickly low fidelity visualization. So I would just get a ton of environments out from Midjourney with
Mm.
just trying to describe the scenario that I would like that and the user scenario that I think the vehicle or whatever you're designing would fit into.
Mm.
And then in a very short time frame, then I can have a good handful of different uh, images that I then can take into, for example, Gravity Sketch,
Mm.
where I can then assess the car, the interior in a full scale environment, and then have maybe this factory setting or something like that around it, and then I can just stretch that. It's not super realistic, but
Mm.
it's convincing so that you can quickly get a feeling. Okay, that well, this is where I would kind of be operating, and
Mm.
which can be very powerful in terms of get the right feeling out of the product, because by the end of the day, then it's consumer products. There's a user in the end, and if we can figure out how the usage of the things are very early on, then we're in a better place to design something that actually matters
Yeah.
and tell the story.
Yeah, I used Gravity Sketch for my final project at uni, and for designing vehicles, it's just amazing. Like being able to,
Yeah,
observe
absolutely.
the vehicle in a 3D space, like in like almost the same scale, well, in the same scale as you would in real life. It's just amazing. Yeah.
Yeah, and in particular when it comes to the automotive interior part of it, because then think about you're sitting in the in the driver's seat, then you, oh, can I reach the steering wheel? Yeah, okay. Can I look out? Can I touch the gear knob? Can I see what's on the screen, or where should I put the screen so that it's not being obscured by the steering wheel? And can I still see out from the A pillars? Is the bonnet too high? All of those like more technical parts of it is very easy to assess in Gravity Sketch. And then if you start very early in the process with getting those things done, then you're a really good place to design something that's all not just aesthetically pleasing, but also functionally ace. For example, then I did a study where we took a 96 percentile male and a 75 percentile female, and then determined their vision from the driver's seat. Sketched out some icons from Gravity Sketch, and then I took the negative volume of those icons, because that determined where can I have furniture space inside of the interior without interfering with the vision.
Yeah, I definitely
It
think
was shocking how little you could see in some vehicles.
Yeah. Yeah, I used it in the same way. Like I designed a motorbike, and I could like lean over the motorbike and test,
Oh yeah,
bar distances, and like accessing the tacho and stuff like that. And like yeah, like usually, I mean, I still used anthropometric data to some degree, but it kind of just enhances the whole experience. Like even the mannequins in Gravity Sketch, you can just set them up on the motorbike and kind of use it as a way to
yeah,
test for
exactly.
like a basic human dimensions. And yeah, it's really crazy for that. I think it might bring an end to maybe not bring an end, but it would definitely make the classic, design for humans books less appropriate to designers in the future. Being able to test
Yeah,
things like that.
yeah, and particularly designing motorcycles in Gravity Sketch is quite powerful as well, especially because you have this highly modular mannequin in there. And while designing motorcycles, then the driver is as much a part of the silhouette of the product as well. It's not only when it's just standing on its own, but also when what does it look like with a driver as part of the shape of it. And when you easily can put a mannequin on and don't need to be able to sketch a well proportioned human, then there's so many steps that you're almost jumping over.
Yeah.
And especially with the thinking about it, as you have when you just sketch on regular paper, then you have 2 dimensions, and then when you move into Gravity Sketch, then it's the same, but you have a third dimension as well, where you can put your line work. It's so quickly to iterate.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because these days with these technologies that are coming out, like VR, AI, things like that, I think that a lot of people kind of get caught up in like the politics around it and kind of forget
Yeah,
like the basic implementation. Like VR, for example, in those use cases, it's so useful for design. But if you kind of get tied up in the fact that it's going to like replace CAD, then you can get lost. The same with like AI. Like if you think AI is going to take your job, maybe you won't use it. But if you think of it like how can you implement it? Like you implement it in a way where you incorporate it into your visualization. And like that's a pretty powerful way to use it. Like you found a way to get into your workflow. So like thinking about AI is like maybe not, taking not using it in a capacity that's gonna really revolutionize your job, but just like how can you use it to improve your workflow? It's a good way to look at it.
Yeah, exactly, because most of those technologies has come to stay. It was the same when 3D modeling started to be more popular, and then and when Photoshop came out as well, then most people were always like, oh yeah, but you still need to be able to do this and that. But by the end of the day, it's what tools can get you to the best result for the user in the end. And also that I see a lot of people misunderstanding text to image prompting, and think that if they just prompt sporty SUV designed by Sid Mead with a Bauhaus influence, then now there's a new design. But that's just an image. It doesn't have any story to it. It needs to
Yeah.
have a narrative in order to be interesting. But if you then start to maybe describe more what kind of feelings you want to wake in the user, this, and describe the style of product you want, and then combining them with some of your own sketch work, and then blend those things, or then you can get something rather unique. And you're then using Midjourney as an example, as more like an external design consultant, your assistant, where you then are in quite some control over it. Also, for example, I was having a look through Behance the other day, and there are so many of the projects that were sharing the same 10 images of Pinterest. So they all had the same design influence. So of course they all looked kind of the same. So how I also like to use Midjourney is to have my own personal Pinterest, where I then type in the shapes or aesthetics that I'm going for, and then I make a mood board from those imagery.
Yeah, we've mentioned this on the podcast before, this kind of modern state where, I mean, I suppose the past industrial design, you'd kind of look to books, you'd look to like historical figures, all these different things for inspiration, whereas these days a simple Google search is like more than people do. Or like or look on Pinterest. And I mean, like, I suppose AI is the next step of that. Like, it's basically just regurgitating information that it collates off Pinterest or Google. And yeah, I mean, it could be a bit of a trap. It could make people even more, I mean, create even more of the same designs. So yeah, like, I suppose it's important to not think of it as like the end all, the only place you look for inspiration. You've still got to look. Like, I really like watching historical videos about like products and things like that, because a lot of the information you get on there like haven't really been done in a long time. And like, I mean, that's all real design is. It's just like bringing up the same things in different ways throughout generations.
But 100%.
But like, if you can look more to the past, I feel like you can get a lot more unique inspiration opposed to just like looking at what you're going to find on a Google search.
I think you are absolutely right there. Especially because there's so much extremely cool engineering as well that somehow have got lost in translation. Where some of those really cool engineered products that you don't really see anymore have so much to offer still, that maybe it's it would be looking old, but there's always like a little bit of it. How that hinges is looks cool. Maybe if I combine it with this contemporary way of surfacing, just as you say, as taking all sorts of different bits and then combining them in a new way.
I've found that like, you look to the past, find this small little mechanical thing, like for example Egyptian water clocks. I found this the other day. They used to use bowls with a little hole in that lost the water at a certain rate to measure time back in the day. And I was like, oh, that's such a cool idea, like basically having a clock that doesn't need any electricity or anything. Like, how could you use that in a modern way? Like that, just that thinking, like taking the past into the future. Like, I think that's it's a really beneficial way to look at it.
Yeah, definitely. And I could also imagine some rather fascinating sculptural ways of solving those things with the older technologies. There's so many lost treasures, I believe, in terms of old technologies. Also, for example, in the 50s, 60s, with how the windscreens on cars were like wrapped almost like cockpits on fighter jets, etc. You don't see that much on cars anymore, and it's almost a lost craft nowadays, but it just looks so cool.
Yeah. Yeah, there's some amazing things about the past, like the early well, I suppose it's like sort of Sid Mead influence, but the
Yeah,
early vehicles were kind of like spaceships of the road. Like they were designed to have these big headlights that look like rocket engines, like to kind of almost look like they were gonna like because it was like that new styling of like the 60s to try and make it look really fast. And yeah, it's just interesting, like all these small changes in history. Whereas now we're in this world, like I was gonna talk to you about this, like the current state of automotive design. It's like kind of it's almost like trying to create like visual aggressiveness to kind of stand out in the market.
yeah,
Like it seems like that's what I'm getting from it anyway. Like all these brands are kind of trying to make something that's just so out there, and like so like futuristic that it stands out in the market. And it just seems like this is just competition to do this over and over from different aspects.
yeah,
And it's like it's so different to what we had in the past. Like you had like the like 1950s, 1960s Ferraris, which were like all about like curvature and like perfect forms. Whereas now it's like the opposite. It's like aggressive, almost like angry looking cars.
yeah, exactly. And especially with this Scandinavian, I wouldn't even call it minimalism, more reductionism,
Mm,
where it's about like just removing everything that's just not that are not necessary
mm,
on the vehicles, and then you have those like extremely clean surfaces, um, with some sharp edges as well, which makes them look rather brutal as well,
mm. Yeah,
as you point out.
yeah.
But it's fascinating how things are changing, and now we also see like a lot of inspiration from the 80s with the very
Mm,
boxy cars as well
mm.
coming out of this retro
Yeah.
futurism, where I think it was the Honda E a few that was
Mm,
presented a few years ago, was like an early adapter there.
yeah. Yeah, it's really interesting how form changes over time. Like it almost seems
Mm.
like the modern day vehicles are almost like inspiring their designs off science fiction. Like you see a vehicle from like a movie in the 80s that looks super futuristic, and these days it's kind of like the norm on the road. Like where I don't know, what's the saying? It's like uh reality interpret no reality like interprets science fiction. Like it's like no reality copies science fiction, like that kind of aspect.
Yeah,
Like science fiction will create something, and then like 30 years from now it almost seem like reality just copied it. But it's like it's just yeah, it's weird. It feels like science fiction can sometimes just predict reality in a way. Yeah.
yeah,
I'm just
that
going on from
is
there.
quite
How did you
fascinating. Yeah.
begin your career in automotive design, and what are some challenges you were faced when you started off?
Um, so I graduated in during COVID. So I had my whole final year in lockdown
Mm,
almost, which made it quite difficult because I was um the year before I had a gap year from university to for an internship,
mm,
which is the place I work now. So when I came back to uni, then I started in a completely new class. Didn't only knew a few people out of 200 students,
mm,
which I met up with once a week in a Zoom call.
mm,
Um, so that was a bit strange, and in particular when you're doing design, then sharing your experiences with your peers, getting different perspectives can be quite important
mm,
in order to do something relatively meaningful. But then when I finished university, then I got an internship um, at an Indian motorcycle startup where I was then working remotely, which was one of the benefits from COVID because that
mm,
made these things uh, possible. Then I was there for half a year, and then after that, yeah, now I've been at my current position for 1.5 years.
mm,
But one of the bigger challenges has been that I have witnessed that there's quite a gap between what the industry is looking for
mm,
and what the universities are preparing you for. It feels like they are preparing you for an industry that's not there anymore. Well,
mm,
I've heard countless of stories of people from the industry that has approaching, and it's not particular to any university in
mm,
particular, but then because they are sort of government funded, um, then they have a specific curriculum that they need to go through, but
mm,
it's not always that decided by people who know what it takes to get into the industry, and that naturally just creates a gap between.
Yeah.
So it requires a lot of effort in your own time as well to make it into the car industry,
Yeah, I've definitely noticed
because
that
it's
here.
so competitive.
I wasn't sure if it was just an Australian thing, but we've talked about this on the podcast before, and there's definitely a perceivable gap. There's
Yeah,
a lot of skills that maybe were taught once that aren't really taught these days because there's this perceived like change of the industry, but like a lot of those skills are kind of still needed and maybe should have more emphasis on in university. And yeah, like I've
yeah,
just received my first position in graduate position, but like I had to work quite hard to get there as well. Like I feel like a lot of my
yeah,
skills I had to kind of refine in those months to bring up to scratch. And even like luckily the podcast was good because I chatted to a lot of people who knew what was missing. But like
mm,
you leave university with this kind of like enlightened confidence that you have everything because you have this fancy certificate. But like in
yeah.
design, I feel like it's a little bit unrealistic, and like you kind of have to you know, learn pretty quickly that you need to still work on your skills if you want to be able to get a job and be competitive in the industry.
Yeah, exactly. And definitely in industries as industrial design or automotive design, where there's so many technologies that are rapidly evolving all the time, then you just need to stay on top of your game to keep up with the pace of how things are changing,
Yeah,
especially these days.
yeah,
Like how technology has changed the past 4 or 5 years are incredible.
mm,
I can remember first starting at university, then there was this talk about, oh, there's so many jobs in clay modeling. And then everyone from my course started to transition into doing clay modeling.
mm,
But now there's hardly any work in clay.
mm,
I don't see it as an industry that would phase out, because it's still physical products for the physical world that we're doing, and then seeing them in full size clay can definitely help do something that are more valuable and
mm,
better. And also because it's so quickly to change a few surfaces
mm,
on the clay, uh, instead of having to then redo the 3D and then have another milled out. Because sometimes then you interpret your design differently from when you see it on the screen in
mm,
VR or in real life. Because when you can actually start to touch the things, then there's a lot of things that you learn from that, and you probably also have experience with that from
mm.
doing some prototyping
Yeah, we have
in
we have the
in
similar
product design.
we have a similar thing from foam modeling. I suppose you can kind of compare it with high
Yeah,
density foam. But I suppose like the one thing about the automotive industry is just crazy is the fact you still do clay modeling. Like it's such an old fashioned thing, but as you're saying, it's so important, and it's really amazing that the industry's kept it up after all these years because I feel like it's
yeah,
such a foundation for the industry as well. Like the original like Model Ts being developed in clay, like pretty much any car you can think of in history has probably had a clay model, and it's just amazing. It's like, and as you said, it's such an art as well. The people who do clay modeling,
yeah.
they're just
And especially because you can just quickly scrape off some bits and then quickly change the surface
yeah.
and then assess it, then put some of the dialog on, and then quickly assess the reflections.
Yeah, that's the thing with design these days. I feel like there's a lot of key processes, like even like physical sketching, for example. Like there's
Mm.
always like a new version of the foundational skills, but like sometimes you can lose something. Like some people could say maybe you don't need clay modeling now, you've got VR, but like you'll definitely lose something. Like it can never be directly transferred. Like that's like me with I feel like digital sketching is never the same as physical sketching for me personally. You lose
Yeah,
the
I totally agree.
yeah.
Like nothing beats a dirty post-it note
Mm,
sketch that communicates your idea, because
mm,
that's what the sketching is effectively in the
mm,
end of the day. It's a way of communicating what goes on in your mind and your ideas. And if whoever you are communicating your idea to understands your idea, then the tool of communication you have been used has
mm,
been the right one. And then throughout, when you progress through the process, then you're changing the tools for
mm,
that visual communication, um, and adding details, etc.
mm. Yeah, I mean that's the amazing thing about design is it's not a one-step process, it's a process. And that's amazing. Like personally, I think it's
Exactly.
one of the best components of design. because like, you know, you can incorporate anything into your workflow. Like you started incorporating AI, and like, you know, I could start incorporating clay modeling into my product design. Like, you know, realistically, there's so many different things you can learn, and like you can even incorporate like a hobby into your practice. Like let's say you get really good
Yeah.
at painting, you could start painting your models. There's always transferable skills, which is awesome. Mm.
Yeah, exactly. And being able to recognize how you can pick and choose those different skills from different design industries are just powerful.
Yeah, definitely.
Like for example, I would love to try to bring in some design methods from fashion design, for example, into designing a car. Maybe have a sculpture, then drape over some fabrics, and then maybe harden it with some glue or something, and then whoa, there's some cool surfaces there. Let's try put some wheel on it. Just do something weird, and then effectively there will come something great out of it at some point.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the thing about design, is it's so multidisciplinary, and I think like kind of not pigeonholing yourself into one discipline and kind of looking to all disciplines for inspiration is just amazing. Like that's why I've actually started getting people from different podcasts on different disciplines.
Yeah.
Like you're an automotive designer. I've got interior
Mm.
designers, architects coming on, because I think like just having industrial design, like realistically, we're all designers and we all have those transferable skills. And like why not continue that
Yeah.
conversation cross disciplinary, you know? Yeah. Um, how have you observed automotive design evolving over the past years, and how do you think it's going to evolve even further in the coming years?
I see VR getting bigger and bigger, and I could also imagine that there would be a lot of clay modelers that would start to pick up Gravity Sketch, because it's sometimes when I've been doing stuff in Gravity Sketch, then it feels like being some kind of a digital clay modeling because of how you are adjusting some of the surfaces when you're zooming in completely and then sweeping through the body panels. But there's so many changes, especially with the technologies and how we do things, going much quicker into 3D modeling part of it. And now when visualization becomes a more frequently in the early stages as well, to try to storyboard and get the right feeling of the project out as a starting point early on. Yeah, there's so many interesting things going on, and in particular with the virtual reality part of it, when it comes to reviewing the things. So for example, then we did an interior where we then had made a low fidelity full size interior box for it. So we got in proper seats, and then we had got built up this full scale MDMF interior placeholder. And then we were sitting in Gravity Sketch and then aligned our view in there with the seat so that we could actually sit and then grab a steering wheel, look around. Then it was what we designed that was around us, kind of reach the screens, etc. And then having that mixed reality experience with it was so powerful, because there's so many things that you learn from that. Oh, damn! We can't see out through the windscreen. The screen is in the wrong position. The steering wheel is too big, and all the seats needs to be lower. All those like small little adjustments that you might not see in those beautiful little videos that the different automotive brand puts out after launching a new product, where they talk about the story. But yeah, it's definitely in these areas, and eye tracking would probably also become a thing in the near future, especially when it comes to motorcycles. Where does people look? And in particular now also when you see that more and more interiors becomes there's just a screen in there and then no buttons, but that takes the focus away from the driver. And how can we solve that so that, okay, we still have a big screen but something to actually touch
Yeah, that's one
Um,
thing, one big thing with me. I feel like I'm not a fan of screen only. What are your thoughts on that? Like, I just think that like the big Tesla
yeah,
design with massive
yeah,
screen,
yeah,
that's it. It's too much for me.
yeah, because think about it like this: when you take your eyes away from the road, then you're literally driving in blindness
Mm,
to either change your song or turn up the volume or something. Where when you have physical buttons, then they're usually also different
mm,
buttons. So you can just feel, okay, it's right over there. Just rough it out, feel you towards the right button, because over time you'd also get
mm.
a sense of what is what. So I definitely prefer a mix
Yeah.
of
Even just
that.
from the
It's nice to
tactile
have a
point,
screen.
you know,
Yeah,
like the
exactly. The
tactility, like
tactility.
when you hold it, when you're in a nice car and you press a button, it has that like a nice feedback from it, and you feel like you're really like in control. Whereas I feel like with touchscreens, it's just not the same. Yeah. Mm.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, it's so cool in the newest Bentley Continental GT. Then on the dashboard, um, then that flips around, so you can choose to have like the old classic dials,
Oh yeah.
and then by the press of a button, then it flips around, and then you have a digital to the screen if you want
Mm.
to see your navigation and stuff like that. And then the buttons for the air vents are like these things that you pull out like on a plane,
Mm.
and it's just all those little touch points are so amazing.
Mm. Yeah, I suppose that is the thing about car design, which almost goes past any other discipline, is that like, especially with, I mean, with luxury cars, especially because you have such a high price tag, you can really put your money into development of the experience of it. Like, really, how is the
Yeah,
experience of the user going to be in that car? Like, how can we improve that? Those small aspects that just really make like driving this car an experience over just like a utility. Yeah, that's amazing.
yeah, absolutely.
You studied in the UK. How did that experience shape your perspective on automotive design?
um yeah, so I had quite a different experience from studying from when I was studying in Denmark and in the the UK. So because everyone on the course in the UK was just interested by cars, then
Mm,
that was just the only thing being talked about, which was um amazing. So every lunch break, then we would just sit in the studio, um, do cool sketches, etc., which had a great impact on shaping us as designers, because we'd learn so much from each other, but
mm,
also because the UK has such a long lasting history of making cars and designing cars, and in particular being in Coventry. I remember when I was studying, then it wasn't um, unfamiliar that would and unusually that there would be driving a camouflaged Land Rover
mm,
down the road,
mm,
test driving, and sometimes then there would be roads closed for JLR to test potentially autonomous cars, or
mm,
etc. And it's just on a regular basis you'd see these camouflage cars driving by. It's like, whoa, okay, what is this? Um, so it has definitely been a great thing to be in an area where there's a lot of automotive things going on, in
mm.
order to being shaped into an automotive design. And also just in this students library there was like a whole section just with some historical cars from Coventry, because
Mm,
it's the heart of British car manufacturing,
mm. Yeah,
even
that's amazing.
though many of the bigger brands has moved away from Coventry and just in the outskirts now.
Mm. Yeah, I went over to the UK when I was younger, but I think going back going back in the next few years will be amazing because like back then I wasn't into design at all, and I think there's just so much amazing design there, like the design museums
Yeah,
and all the history. I think I'll appreciate it a lot more now that I am in that space. So yeah, I
yeah,
think traveling is
absolutely.
just amazing. Mm,
Yeah, and especially when you gain a deeper knowledge yourself in design and aesthetics, then you really learn to appreciate all of those things.
Yeah.
Um,
How do you incorporate cultural influences into your designs? You've already spoken about the kind of the influences of aesthetic. Yeah, how do you incorporate that into your designs, and how do you incorporate the Asian market? Because now there's I mean, specifically here, there's a massive trend towards Asian car manufacturing. How do you kind of account for all different markets when you design?
So it depends on who the customer is. If it's for a Chinese brand that we would design into, then we would look into, okay, where are they located in China? Is there something particular with the cultural aspect here? Are there some very significant pieces of architecture that could eventually influence the visual design part of this, to bring in some culture and into it, but also just as much looking into what's trending in those areas. For example, what many car manufacturers has done when getting into the Chinese markets has been looking at what's considered premium in China. And that's having a lot of leg room on the rear seats. So many of the manufacturers then made longer wheelbases, elongated their cars to make this more premium feeling, which is quite attractive for a lot of Chinese people, because having all of that leg room indicates wealth, which they'd like to communicate
Okay.
to others. Big front grills has also been something that they have been perceived as being very premium, and which I believe is also one of the reasons why you have seen BMW, for example, expanded the size of the grill to design for a Chinese driven market.
Yeah, it'd be quite hard to balance the needs of all these different nations all over the world when you know that most brands are going to be selling cars internationally. It's very hard to, like, I mean, I feel like a lot of the cars in Australia will get, like the Asian cars, like Chinese, Japanese cars here, and they don't necessarily, like, when the new models come out, I feel like they don't necessarily fit in with the cars that are currently on the road in Australia. But like, I suppose it's the change in aesthetic as well. But like, a lot of the problem in Australia is we have a limit of what cars we can even buy because of the shipping. There's not enough cars imported for the amount of people that are buying cars at the moment, and especially with the chip shortage as well. There's a lot of car companies that can't even get like, we can't even get enough stock of most of the big brands. So a lot of Australians are resorting to buying like the Chinese brands, like what is it, like Haval and stuff like that. I don't know if you have it overseas, which are basically like kind of cheaper cars because they're the ones that are getting the chips. So yeah, it's been interesting to see. In the last couple of years, the whole of the road has changed in Australia pretty much.
Oh, that's fascinating. I did not know that.
Even BYD, do you know BYD? I don't know if you have it. Yeah, BYD is also, like, I see them all the time now, and even like 6 months ago, you'd never see them here.
Yeah, I've never seen one of them in real life. Only seen flashy renders of them online. Incredible interiors. They're doing some really cool stuff there.
Yeah, definitely. Can you discuss some of the design challenges you face when designing? Oh, I've kind of already said that. You've mentioned VR. What other changes do you think it's going to have in the future? Do you think it's going to be a replacement of the traditional CAD software for automotive design, or do you think it's going to take a lot more for it to become kind of in that aspect?
I think it most of all would just be another tool into the process. So for example, when I was interning at Raptee Energy, this Indian startup, before my first graduate job, then from using Gravity Sketch, then I enabled, I was somehow bridging the gap between the creative designer and the alias modeler. For me, when I was just designing directly in 3D and VR and sketching, then it made it possible for the alias modeler then to do more complex surfaces earlier on in the process, because it was easier to read the 3D data from me than an abstract sketch, for example. But with those things together, then the modelers could all of a sudden work more efficiently, and it was so unexpected for me that it could have that impact on the workflow. So I think we will see more things with there, and also in terms of communicating with the engineers, and having the 3D data early on only gives it better opportunities to design something that really matters. And in particular, when you're using VR as well as a tool for creative packaging, positioning the batteries or fuel cells and seats, the layout of the cars, etc. For example, if you're doing a bus or some public transport where you need to fit in a lot of people, then it almost becomes a puzzle. But then when you can quickly move things around in VR and test it out, does this feel claustrophobic when I'm standing up in here? Then you can really do things quickly and iterate very quickly. So I think we will start to see more of this, and then also more work where it's with a mixed reality, where you're wearing a headset, and then you would still be able to see what's around you. Maybe you have a low fidelity interior box that you're designing on already. It could be, for example, if you're designing steps to get into a truck, for example, where there's many design problems surrounded by, and then you can quickly just make some physical steps and then sketch on top of them in Gravity Sketch, find new aesthetics, new ways of doing things. And one of the real powers of the virtual reality 3D modeling is then you, with mixing the VR and reality, then instead of having to do maybe 8 physical models to test the steps or grab handles, ergonomics of steering wheel, then you could maybe only have the need to maybe do 2 or 3 of the models. And then because of together with the digital assets, then you can have a much more efficient process, and then the things that you're testing would be of higher value.
Yeah, it definitely speeds up the process.
Yeah,
I think it depends on the application. Like for consumer electronics and smaller consumer products, I feel like it doesn't make as much sense. Like I've tried before, but definitely for furniture, I think it really can be good VR modeling. And for automotive design, I need to get more into furniture design with VR. It just looks like so much fun.
Yeah. And I think you're right with when it comes to the consumer electronics. For example, I wouldn't design a mouse in VR, for example. I'd maybe do some visualization or small bits of it, but it's more when it comes to bigger things, interior and
makes more sense.
Architectural things where it gets like very powerful.
Yeah.
But also for just like the ideation part of it. Whereas especially when it comes to things like small electronic consumer products, then you'd also like to have it physical much earlier on in the process. For example, if you're doing a controller for a game console, then you'd like to have it in your hands as early as possible, because there's so much with the ergonomics. How does it feel in your hands? How does it weight feel?
Yeah, definitely. I think for that kind of application, some kind of finger tracking. I know you can already get these gloves where it tracks all your fingers, would be really helpful.
Yeah.
Because I think like I have a Quest. What VR do you use? I use Quest 2.
I have a Quest 2 as well.
Yeah, Quest 2, yeah. Yeah, like the couple of fingers you can move is fine, but I think like having all the fingers motion would be really good for testing out the ergonomics of small functional things, because you're kind of limited in a way by how much you can understand the grip of things.
Yeah. It could be pretty cool if you then would wear a glove that could have some haptic feedback. So if you then touch your digital asset within VR, then there would be like some vibration or
Yeah.
something that would give it an artificial experience of
Mm.
holding that controller or your mouse
Yeah.
or something.
Do you believe in the metaverse kind of concept? Or do you think it's going to be a bit more of a pipe dream and not necessarily applicable in society?
I'm not too sure. I think it's a bit of a strange concept, but it's also fascinating. Um, I think it's difficult with all of that, with those NFTs, etc. Um, to have only digital artworks that you can't enjoy in your real physical life. But then on the other hand, then there's a lot of identity that goes into it.
Mm.
Um, in many video games, and people buy skins to have the character look cooler, whatever, and that's basically the same. The reason why people are buying a Nike sneaker is because then they're in the club of people wearing Nikes. It's identity. So I could easily see that in some years, then when you buy a concert ticket, then you get that as an NFT and have that in your digital wallet so that you can show people, oh, that I've been to this event,
Mm. Well,
and
even the
all
whole
of those things.
even like the festival experience from a VR perspective. I know
Yeah,
Tomorrowland, when over COVID,
yeah,
Tomorrowland did like a VR experience of the festival. I didn't end up doing it, but I think you can still download it online. But it's just such a crazy idea. Like the DJs were still DJing, but from like an avatar. I'm pretty sure they were from an avatar. And then yeah, basically there was
yeah,
like a VR immersive crowd where they were all enjoying the music from their home. It's just a crazy concept.
yeah. That's pretty cool.
Mm. Yeah, I don't know. I don't really see the metaverse personally becoming that like the end all. I think there's always going to be, especially in design, there's
Yeah.
always going to be like in especially in our field. Like I think some fields of design maybe you could get away with completely digital, like UX design and things like that. But I think for like more physical design jobs like industrial design, automotive design, I think you have to have that physical interaction with humans, and I think it's very hard to imitate that.
Mhm.
Hmm.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right there. Um,
But it'd be interesting.
Especially when it comes to like the person development part of it, getting a high five from your colleague or your friends when you do something
Hmm.
cool or something of significance, um, just triggers so many positive internal things as well. And
Hmm.
I'm not how sure how you'd get the same kind of thing from when you're in virtual reality.
Hmm.
But there's still like ex- many benefits from it. For example, then I remember a few years ago, then I was attending a short gravity sketch course by what was it called, Car Design Academy,
Hmm.
by Eric Stoddard. And then I was sitting in my flat in Coventry, and then the instructor was in California, and then there was other people from America and just all over the world, or people gathering in the same gravity sketch room
Hmm.
and working on the same models at the same time,
Hmm.
being so far away, and that was incredible. So I could see like the metaverse being um, very beneficial in a corporate
Hmm.
setting, so that you can actually set up a meeting and kind of be there physically together, but be in completely different places.
Yeah.
Still work on the same model. You can have um, the models and set the models up on podiums or something
Hmm.
like that inside of a, a gravity sketch scene, etc., so that you can make these great presentations and very immersive, and people can also attend them from a computer screen.
Hmm.
Um, and I think these like little twists of the metaverse could be quite beneficial for in many
Hmm.
cases. I don't know how the in when it comes to just like purely entertainment and social interaction, how it would develop. Maybe
Mm.
it could have positive impacts on loneliness
Mm.
or some difficulties like that, because then you can just meet up with like-minded people in a space where you can just leave whenever
VR chat.
you feel like. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. Like I think when you compare it to the alternative, like we're in the modern world post COVID, the world's changed a lot. There's this world of, remote work, and obviously you're always going to lose something with remote work. But if you compare, like, let's say collaborating on Miro or Zoom chat, or even just a phone call, like you're
Mm.
not going to have anywhere near the same ability to communicate your ideas. And if you're sitting in a VR room, drawing your ideas in 3D space. Like when you think of it
Yeah.
from that aspect, like not replacing, day-to-day working in an office with your peers, but replacing kind of that need for sometimes having to work remote, I think it's can be really powerful. Hmm.
Yeah. And especially the way we are communicating the initial ideas are changing so much nowadays, is because usually then it would be a quick sketch on a napkin, and then you just pass that over the table. But now when you're in a video conference instead, then it can be difficult to just put up the sketch here and show that. So now I see more and more people start to then quickly take photos of Google and then photo bash them,
Hmm.
chop them up and put them together in new ways, and then quickly send that over to communicate, yeah, the design intent or the narrative.
Hmm. Yeah, it's really exciting. Like, I mean, I've been doing a lot of research into the history of industrial design, and like, there's obviously been so many pinnacle times in history that have had such an impact on the industry.
Yeah.
Like for example, like just like the revolution, like just when a new technology would come out to create a product in a new way, like a new manufacturing method, it would completely revolutionize every product that came out because people would implement this
Mm.
new technology. But I think that the digital era and things like AI and VR, even though they seem daunting, I think they could have almost the biggest impact in history on design, because like the possibilities are basically endless. Like one thing I've really been thinking
Yeah.
about, which I think is interesting, is like imagine if the metaverse actually becomes a thing, and an industrial designer or an automotive designer doesn't even design physical products; they design like digital assets. So like a new pair of
Yeah.
shoes for the metaverse, or like a new car to drive around in like VR. Like it's pretty crazy to think that that's possible, but it could be.
Yeah. And some of the exciting parts about designing a car in particular for the
Mm.
metaverse is that you might maybe not be as restrained by physics
Mm.
as you would if you are designing to the real world,
Mm.
which can be rather exciting as well. Then
Mm.
you just to a car that fly around or just change form, and there's so much many new layers of creativity and possibilities then to
Mm.
unwrap.
Yeah, I do think that like the new trend in design is almost like having no limits. Like for so
Yeah.
long, there's been these structural limits, or physics limits, or even manufacturing limits, like that limit the design of what you can create. Whereas now, like in the back, you've got 3D printing. Like perfect example, you can create something so quickly that has such an impact, and can be
Yeah.
made in a way that probably could never be made in traditional processes. And yeah, it's interesting. Like maybe the future will just 3D print cars, and then you can create whatever design you want. Like who knows? But yeah, it's pretty amazing, the future.
Yeah, I agree.
Hmm. Is 3D printing something that's implemented into the car space, automotive design space?
Yeah,
Hmm.
in particular in the prototyping part of it, um during showcasts, etc., then there's a lot of milling, and there would be a lot of 3D printing for specific parts. A
Hmm.
steering wheel for a show car, for example, would in many cases be 3D printed.
Hmm.
And then it's both with FDM, and resin, and the powder machines as well, because you can get so precise with the things.
Hmm. Yeah. Do you
and
think it
and
will ever
and
be?
and also again you need to get the things in physical to test them if they're working right.
Hmm. Yeah. Do you think there'll ever be 3D printing implemented in a functional way in automotive design, or do you think that there's too many like limitations currently?
So there's an American company called Singer, who does some very, very fascinating things. So they're using generative AI as the main resource of designing. So they have got like these extremely fascinating chassis shapes that almost looks like some bone structures.
Yeah, like organic structures.
Yeah, so they're extremely lightweight, and extremely strong, but you can't mill any of that out. So they have been 3D printed, because then you can have those more complex shapes. I'm not quite sure what the material they have been printing these parts in have been, what kind of metal.
I think they do usually aluminium
But it's
printing, right, these
yeah.
days. Yeah.
But that's incredible, and I think we will start to see more of that, especially when it comes to the more technical parts of it. For example, the swing arm on a motorcycle, then you can with these with this generative AI, then you select 2 points, and then you say like, okay, it needs to withstand this amount of force, needs to be able to move this much, and it should not weigh more than this, and then the AI just creates thousands of iterations based on those restraints that you have given it, um, and it might even calculate someone on its own. And then how that's shaped is rather fascinating as well, because you get those like beautiful organic shapes that are much stronger, much lighter.
That is the interesting thing, I suppose, is like I personally really like organic design. I think it's really interesting to look at.
Yeah.
I can see how some people wouldn't like it because it's so different to what we currently have. But I personally really like it. But what I find really interesting is like these organic structures are like stronger than a traditional, human created structure. But realistically, it's a natural design. Like it's quite similar to what is already common in nature. So it's like nature is already so
Yeah,
well designed. You can kind of just look to
exactly.
nature for improvements of your own designs. Yeah.
Yeah. I saw a TED talk a little while ago about some generative design with AI, and this guy was making a drone, and then he used generative design to make the best chassis for it, because when you're making a product that needs to defy gravity, then weight is important. Um, and then the whole structure of this ended up being very, very similar to these squirrels that are almost flying, because their bones are so light, and it was just fascinating that as you said as well, that it just looks like something that you have already seen in nature. So sometimes I also tend to ask myself, when I'm having a difficulty with designing some things, then I ask myself, okay, so how would nature
Yeah.
solve this?
Yeah.
Because every little part of nature has spent millions of years in perfecting like one specific skill. And I think it's so fascinating when you see how nature influences design. One of my favorite examples of this is probably the Japanese bullet trains, because when they were driving through a tunnel, then because of the pressure of air, then there would be a huge bang when it was exiting the tunnel on the other. And then one of the engineers on this project was also a bird watcher. So he saw, then he noticed the kingfisher diving after a fish, and there was no splash at all. So he started to study this bird, and then he changed the shape of the front of the train to have more of a beak kind of shape. So from not changing anything in the engine, then the train got a lot faster, more fuel efficient, and they had got completely rid of that huge bang after exiting the tunnel, because there wasn't all of that compressed air that needed to get out. And it's just fascinating when nature and science shapes things.
Well, that's the thing. Like nature is so perfect already. Like
Yeah,
like sometimes when I walk through nature, I just look and I'm like, wow, that's a good design. Like it almost looks like I find so much inspiration as
yeah,
well from nature because you walk around, you're like, oh, that looks like the basis of a chair, or like that looks like the
yeah,
basis of this. And like, yeah, that is the thing. Like we are kind of working to catch up with nature. We have been, since the beginning of
absolutely.
time. But like, will we ever design as well as nature can? Like,
Hmm.
probably not.
Yeah, exactly. And being able to recognize those things
Mm,
are a skill on its own. To
mm,
be able to see something in nature and then transfer it into a design perspective, or take that influence. For example, a lot of boats have been inspired from
mm,
the surfaces of shark skin,
mm,
because it goes so easily through water, so they're trying to replicate the particular structure of that to make boats faster,
mm,
to cut easier through the water. um, and it's just fascinating to see all those little things.
mm. Do you think that's going to be something that increases in the future? We like kind of blend in with the structure of nature?
Possibly, yeah. I think whenever we have like a huge or a bigger challenge,
Mm,
something to fix, then we will find some kind of a solution somewhere in nature for many of the
mm,
things. um
mm,
Fungi networks, etc., in order to plan traffic in cities, because how they are functioning
mm,
underground is so efficient. So that's just inspiration everywhere
mm. Yeah, I think that's a
to
good
do
way to
things
look
in
at
a better
life.
way.
There's inspiration everywhere.
Yeah,
Like I think as a designer, you can get very pigeonholed, but if you look at the world like inspiration instead of, just looking to the internet, I think you can really find so much. Mm,
yeah, exactly. And it's just look at the right places.
mm. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I think this kind of comes back to sustainability in a way. Like for the past, indefinite future, we've been designing
Mm.
kind of against nature, to try and make things possible that don't necessarily, live with the nature of the world, and instead create destruction in the world. And I suppose like
Yeah,
the movement into sustainability isn't just necessarily from a perspective of saving the planet. It could even just be designing like the planet, to try and
yeah.
make
Oh,
something
that's
that
an
doesn't,
interesting perspective.
yeah, to try design something that isn't just sustainable from like a materials or like a manufacturing perspective, but maybe blends in with nature and doesn't look like an eyesore. Like, because currently we have these concrete cities
Yeah,
that, stand out in the world and you can see them from space, and like maybe we could somehow blend in with nature and kind of be more interconnected.
yeah. But also when you look at it from um, a perspective of well-being,
Mm,
then being in a concrete jungle is not nice. It's not natural for us to be in those environments. So if you can bring back nature to those
mm,
places, then it just improves um, the environment so much. Um, for example, I went to Paris last year, and they have managed to put in a lot of small little parks all over the place, and
mm.
in the middle of all the bigger roads, then there are trees, so it feels like they're brought in back some of the nature to it, and it
That's great.
makes the space um, breathe
Mm.
in a completely new way.
I think that's
um,
really important. Like, I used to live in London, and London's kind of like that. Like I don't know if they did on purpose, but there's a lot of parks, and it seems like seemingly everywhere you go, there's this little garden, or there's a massive park, like Hyde Park's right in the center of London, and like it doesn't necessarily feel
yeah.
as much of a concrete jungle in London as some cities. I feel like because of that
Mm.
connection with parks. Like you'll be walking through the city to get somewhere, and you'll walk through a nice like green park with a nice old tree, and it kind of makes you not feel like you're not just living in this massive city. And I think like a lot of
Yeah,
cities can
exactly.
kind of take from that. Mm.
But
Going
design
back,
like nature is a fascinating way of doing things, because there's so many great ways of taking inspiration. For example, then I've also seen people almost growing furniture where they have with different kind of mushrooms, and then they have had some kind of a mold where they have been growing into, and then you almost have a finished product. Like it's just mind-boggling, because then you can almost talk about it as that you're harvesting a chair.
You grew this chair.
Somehow, yeah, exactly. And also when waste products from other industries are being utilized to create new products. For example, then there's this Copenhagen-based company who takes waste from apple cider production and makes leather from that.
Wow.
Yeah, from all the apple meat. Then they extract the fibers from that and then have like very, very sustainable leather alternatives.
Yeah, the future's looking really amazing. Like the possibilities are just endless. Like even going back to the mushrooms, like the concept of mushrooms, like have you heard there's they're trialing certain types of mushrooms that can eat plastic to try and clear up like the plastic waste in the world, and like even just like things like
That's
that,
amazing.
or how mushrooms communicate under the ground. Have you heard about this? They can communicate
Yeah.
all the way through underneath the ground with their like interconnected ecosystem almost, and like even just the concept of that, like it's kind of like the way internet works, really, like from a more natural perspective. But we have these wires under the ground that connect all these different people all around the world to communicate, and it's kind of the same principle. Like we've almost accidentally imitated the way mushrooms communicate.
Yeah, and if you could then take that the step further and use that connectivity to develop how a city is planned, for example, with the traffic, to make that run a lot smoother, etc. Because cities nowadays are not designed for people; they're designed for cars to drive around, but it's not in the most effective way. So it could be interesting to see how we could take inspiration from nature to design cities moving forward for people to live there, because now it's many of them is just grids to drive on.
Yeah. Cities are an interesting one, because I feel like with the move since COVID, there's a lot of companies that are kind of moving away from the need of being right in the center of the city for for an office or things like that. A lot of people are doing 3-day work weeks, 4-day work weeks, and even more than that. Like some people are not even having an office, and they're just having those like collaborative spaces. So it's going to be interesting to see, like maybe the need for a city won't even be because the concept of a city is relatively old fashioned. Like it's a hub. It's where all the people live, so we can get resources to them in the most efficient way. Along rivers and canals a lot of the time. But like the world's changed a lot since then. Like maybe it's not necessarily the best structure for the future. It's gonna be interesting.
Yeah, I bet so. Yeah, some interesting thoughts.
Do you believe we will move back to a more subtle design of vehicles from the past, or do you think we will continue on this trajectory of futuristic hard lines?
So design and aesthetics, it's like it's going in circles. So I wouldn't get surprised if then in maybe 10 years then there would be a more kind of organic influence to cars. So I wouldn't get surprised from that. That there would be more softer shapes in introduced again. But the real interesting part of the future of automotive design is the interiors, if you ask me, because we would also see a transition into more and more autonomous vehicles, and then you have a completely new space to design. What are you going to do if you're not driving the car? Is it a new space that you have now to relax, to calm down after a busy day at work, or is it a place where you're sitting and preparing for your day at work? Are you preparing for a meeting, or are you just spending time with your family on your way to vacation? Are you having your coffee meeting in there? There's just endless of possibilities of what that space can be, which I find very interesting. And then if you combine that with all the new possibilities with exciting materials as well to add into there, and compute completely new feelings, user scenarios.
It's kind of like you go back to the beginning when they designed interiors of airplanes when they first started designing them. Have you seen this? The interiors, some of the ideas people came up with, you see these amazing drawings and renders of these interiors. Some of them are just the craziest ideas, like nothing like what you see a plane these days. But it's because like they had no idea what a plane was going to be. They were still deciding, you know, what structure the interior of a plane would take. And you know, like now it's this rigid form of these people sitting really close together. But you know, back then they had ideas for lounges and you know beds and you know it's like a bar.
Wow,
but the thing is
sounds
like
mega premium.
yeah, but it's like where we are now. Like we're kind of in the same space, but from a, you know from a different perspective. We're kind of trying to understand where the space of autonomous vehicles are going to go, and it's really interesting. Yeah. Mm.
Yeah, absolutely, because there's so many possibilities.
Yeah, I mean, it could be anything. That's the crazy thing. Like, that's the awesome part about design, I suppose, as well. Like, you're not going to really get stuck in a stagnant job that doesn't change because design's always changing. And if you don't change, you'll be left behind.
Yeah, and people just want new cool things as well.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Well, going all the way back to the beginning, you started off as a student and you've worked in for a few years now, I suppose, in design. What advice do you give to someone who's just come out of university or maybe even at the end of their university? Like, what advice do you give to them now with your new experience as a designer?
The number one tip that I could probably give to recent graduates or people who are still at university finishing soon would be to have an online presence on LinkedIn, start to develop a network, because that is so powerful. People are so friendly and willing to help anyone in the different communities. So definitely start post things on LinkedIn and show how passionate you are about these things. And then also not be afraid of try new technologies and do things different ways. And then most of all, just have fun with what you're doing, because you can somehow see that through the products as well, that if you have had a lot of fun, then it usually showcases in the end result as well.
Yeah, no, that's great advice. Follow your passions,
Yeah,
even if they seem hard, just keep following them and you'll get there. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And then ask for help. People usually tend to really want to help others.
Yeah, I found that in the design community. People are just so lovely. Like, I don't know if it's the same with all industries. I definitely think there's just an attitude in design because people know that it's hard and they've gone through it themselves. They just want to help people and they're happy to kind of take your call whenever. Like, I met with the leader of the head of one of the consultancies in Brisbane, and he was happy to have coffee with me, and I had a chat with him, and it was great. But like, I feel like a lot of industries you wouldn't get that, but people are just ready to take your call and they're ready to help out.
Yeah, exactly. But you'll also find a lot of people who are very protective with their ideas and don't want to share them anywhere. But you also have to understand that designing a car is a group effort. You're never going to do that alone, and likewise with many other design disciplines, then it is very collaborative. You're not going to get any consumer product out there alone. Maybe you could influence the design a lot alone, but you'd never design something that are truly unique without either asking for help or helping someone else or sharing what you're doing. Because also if you post something on a cool idea on LinkedIn and other sees that, it's not like Audi or Volkswagen or any of the other OEMs would take that idea and then we're going to take this, because it's not quite how the process works. But it can be a way of market yourself and really showcase how passionate you are about doing this, because then they might see that and think, okay, there's some cool stuff here, but he's so passionate, so maybe we can shape him even further. For example, my internship I got out of straight after university was because of my LinkedIn presence. They contacted me on LinkedIn, and because they were looking for someone in automotive with a Scandinavian perspective to design as a fresh pair of eyes on their Indian motorcycle. And if I hadn't been posting on LinkedIn or connecting with people, then that would not have happened.
Yeah, it never hurts to have an internet presence.
Yeah.
Yeah, I got into
Exactly.
LinkedIn quite late, but I think that it should be pushed more in university. It should be like get into it, because I think
Definitely.
not for every field, but definitely for business and design, LinkedIn is crazy powerful. Really gets you out there.
Yeah. So for example, then when I post something and then people either comment or like it, then I would usually go through the list of people who has interacted on the post and then send them a message afterwards and then, hey, thanks for supporting my post. I really appreciate it. And there's multiple benefits from that. First of all, then they would be more likely to do that again. And then if there's some great designer that likes my post, then it pops up in their network, and then I have access to their network. And it's also an open invitation for me to message them when they like a post. And it's an easy way of then starting a conversation. And then the second benefit from that is then they would also many times say like, oh yeah, of course, I'm always supporting good work. You're doing some quality work and this and that, and which can be a great motivator as well, because you get those extra dopamine release. Of course, not do it for try to get the attention, but it's just a powerful way of start conversations with people who could lead you to something great down the line.
I even think it's like a visual network. It really helps, because sometimes, like, let's say you're really interested in the specific industry, but you might not remember that you have that contact who used to work there before. If you have LinkedIn, you could look up the company and it will show you anyone in your network who's previously worked there, or is even connected with them. Like, even for the podcast, I've got a couple of people on recently just because I've seen that someone I already know is connected with them, and I message them and say, hey, would you be able to connect me with so and so? Would you be able to make an introduction? And a lot of time they're really happy to do it. And like, I suppose it's just the power of being able to visually understand the network you have.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's so important, because you could also argue that it's some kind of a career insurance, because when you have built that community and you have helped others, then that help you have given to others, then that would somehow come around to you one way or another.
Yeah, definitely. Well, thank you for coming on today, and yeah, I've had a great chat with you. It's been nice to meet
thank you for having me.
Yeah, and yeah, I wish you all well of your current and future activities.
Yeah, thanks, and you too.
Yeah. Anyway, mate, well, have a good day. I'll talk to you later.
Yeah, you too. Bye bye.